It's easy to burn through tokens in Claude Code and not know how that happened. Uber blew an entire year's budget in just 4 months, and another company spent $500 million on Claude in just 1 month. And this happens because each time you send or receive a message inside a session, Claude has to go through every single one of those messages before it gives you a response. So the longer the session, the more it's going to cost you. But there are a few key things you can do to massively reduce your costs, and in this video I'm going to go through 4 tips that can help with that I'm sure you've never heard of. So hit subscribe and let's get into it. Before we get into these tips, let's talk about a model's context window, which we can call the model's memory for a particular session. So the more you have, the more a model can remember, and the less you have, well, the less it can remember. And for most modern models, that's about 1 million tokens. And if 100 tokens is about 75 words, then 1 million tokens is about 750,000 words, which sounds a lot, but that whole context window isn't yours to spend. In fact, a lot of it's already gone before you type your first prompt, because the system prompt, the system tools, your custom skills, your installed MCP tools, and your Claude MD or Agent MD file all eat into it first. Now, Anthropic have reduced the Claude system prompt by about 80% because the smarter a model gets, the less hand-holding it needs, but that's on the model side, the part you can't control. So let's go through what you can do on the side that you can control. Because whenever Claude or any AI model needs to do research on the internet, it scrapes through one or many pages, goes through all of that markup to find exactly what it needs before giving you a response. And you can reduce a lot of tokens used for this specific process with the 4 tips I'm going to give you. Starting off with tip number 1, which is don't scrape, just ask. So imagine I wanted to get some information from this page using Claude. I could give it a prompt like what is Apple's 3-year return with a URL to help it find that information, then also ask for its 5-year return as well as comparisons against Sony, Amazon and GoPro. Now here I'm specifying to use Claude Code's default tools because I have some other tools and skills installed. So now Claude is making multiple web fetches, scraping the information and then using a smaller model to summarize it before passing all the information back to this main model to give me this response. Now let's try the exact same prompt, but instead we're going to specify the Firecrawl scrape skill with the -q flag, which I'll explain later on. Now here I already have the Firecrawl CLI and skills installed, but you could also use the MCP server. And here we can see the Firecrawl scrape skill was loaded, it ran a few shell commands, and it returned a similar response. Now if we go back to the session that used Claude Code's default tools and run the /context command, we can see the whole process used up 15.8k tokens. And if we look at Firecrawl, we used 14.4k tokens, which is more than 1k less tokens than Claude Code's default tools. Now, this may not seem like much initially, but if you're doing lots of research, doing lots of scrapes, asking lots of questions, then this could easily add up. And the reason this uses less tokens is because as well as scraping the page, we're using the Q flag to ask the scraped page a specific question, so Firecrawl extracts just that information instead of passing Claude back the whole scraped page. In fact, let's look at this in code to understand this properly. So here we've kind of created our own mini Claude code using the Anthropic Claude Agent SDK, and what we're doing is giving it a prompt, a similar prompt to get the current APPL stock, but we're restricting it to just the web fetch tool. Then after that, we're just getting the information from the tool, so the bytes and the result, and we're printing out the character length of the result, the actual result, and the bytes that were fetched to get the information. And after we run the script, this is the result we get from the smaller model, so the summarized scraped web page, which is in total 295 characters. Now, if we compare that with Firecrawl, so again, we've made our mini agent using the Claude Agent SDK, but this time we've created a custom MCP tool, and all this is doing is using the scrape endpoint with a type of question. The question itself will be defined by the model, and then we're asking the exact same prompt and restricting it to our custom MCP tool. And when we run the script, Firecrawl just returns 6 characters, which is much less than the 295 that was returned from Claude Code, which explains why the token savings are much less with Firecrawl. Let's move on to the next tip, which is shape the data, not the page. Imagine I want to get information from this Replit pricing page. Now, this page contains a lot of things, so the tier, the price, what you get, and there's a bunch of stuff down here, so the FAQs and the footer. Now, all I actually want is the name of the tier, the price, the number of collaborators, and number of parallel agents. I don't need anything else. So let's see what we can do to save tokens when getting this information. Now, in order to speed up the rest of the tips, I'm just going to stick to code instead of doing the example inside the Claude Code CLI. So here again, I've created my own mini Claude Code agent with a prompt to use webfetch to extract specific information like name, price, collaborator limit, and parallel agent limit, as well as restricting it to just use the webfetch tool. So this is the full result of that prompt, which is 942 characters. But with Firecrawl, it's 338. And the way we've been able to reduce it is by using the JSON schema option, which I should mention works with or without an API key. So I'll take it out just to show you it still works. And here we create a ZOD schema specifying name, price, and all the other information we want. Again, we create a custom MCP tool, which uses Firecrawl scrape with a type of JSON and the schema we defined earlier. So running the script again, just to show you it works without an API key, we still get a small amount of characters because Firecrawl is doing a scrape behind the scenes and only extracting the things we've specified in our JSON schema. Claude Code, however, does the scrape and uses a smaller model to summarize it, so it tends to add more characters in its summary. Tip number 3. Batch it, don't loop it. This tip builds on the 2 previous tips because instead of asking a question or using JSON schema on one URL, you can do it with multiple URLs. So here we're using Claude again to use the webfetch tool, and we're asking it to give me all the current stock prices from these 5 URLs. Now, the problem with Claude is that it can't make a single webfetch tool call, meaning it needs to make one tool call per URL, which results in 5 calls with around 1100 characters and all this spiel that isn't useful to the original prompt we asked. Whereas if we compare that to Firecrawl, it just uses one tool call and uses 10 times less characters. How does it do that? Firecrawl has a batch scrape method for multiple URLs, and here we can pass in a type of question or JSON with our schema, which ends up massively reducing the number of characters that are returned. Let's move on to the 4th and final tip, which is ask every result, not just one page. So far in all the tips we've gone through, we've passed in a URL, but what if you don't have one and you just want it to do a general search? Well, Firecrawl can support that too. Now for this tip, I'm not even going to show Claude Code's version because we know Firecrawl can do it better. So here we're using the Firecrawl search endpoint instead of scrape, and as usual, we're passing in a question. This time we're asking what's the latest stable version of Node. So Firecrawl has searched for 5 different pages based on our prompt, scraped all of the information, and only extracted the bit we've asked for. So here the result is just over 100 characters, and it gives us the exact answer from most of the pages, which is different to using a regular Firecrawl search with a query and a format of Markdown, because this also finds 5 pages based on our prompt, but scrapes all the information from the pages and not just the question we asked for. So just to recap, tip number 1. Don't scrape, just ask. If you need one specific piece of information from a page, don't scrape the whole thing, just extract that bit. Tip 2, shape the data, not the page. If you know the exact information or fields you want, then just extract those instead of repassing the whole page. Tip 3, batch, don't loop. If you already have a list of URLs you want to get information from, then do all of that in one tool call instead of looping over the same tool call over and over again, which takes a lot of time. And tip number 4, ask every result, not just one page, meaning you can apply these tips, so asking questions and JSON schema retrieval, to search results if you don't have a specific URL, instead of doing it just to one page. Thanks for watching. And if this has got you interested in signing up to Firecrawl, then you can use this code to get 500 extra credits. And if you want to see how to use Claude Code to make web MCP calls using Firecrawl, then you can watch the next video where I show you exactly how to do that using the Firecrawl Interact endpoint.